Christine. Appreciate you. It is wonderful to be here. First, I'd like to thank Penn State Great Valley, PACT, all of the sponsors for each of the panel sessions today, and most importantly, all of you attending. Today is meant to elucidate what we are experiencing in this world of, well, whatever it's going to be and whatever we choose to make of it. I don't think anybody can doubt that artificial intelligence is changing the way that lives are lived. And we're going to be discussing that through the course of the day today. It's not just about business. It's not just about commerce. It's not just about education. This is a societal shift, and we're at a pivotal moment right now. And it's up to us to not only look at the benefits and strengths that this new superpower can give us, but also the potential risks and what our obligations are to our society to make sure that we imbue in our businesses, in our relationships, in our education, in our government, in any system that we have under which we work to make it better, effective for us as humans, and also safe. Joining me today, I want you to welcome with me as we discuss some of these topics and trends, my friend, longtime forum person who's been on stage and not in the flesh, but also in the virtual world, Peter Coffey. Peter, good to see you.
Good morning, Mike. Good morning, everyone. It's good to be, quote, with, unquote, you again.
Well, in this virtual world, I mean, we've certainly endured a lot over the past few years, and I think it feels just as real that you're behind that screen in 2D as all of the folks in 3D here today.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much. And again, it's a privilege to be able to bookend the day with this opening with you and then the closing remarks that I'll be able to be bringing at the end of the day.
Outstanding. Yeah, we're looking forward to that. Something that you should know about Peter, he's been here a few times. Peter, how many fora have you attended at this point?
I think all but one of them, which I think means this might be my 10th, because I think this is the 11th.
Uh-huh. So we're in the second decade of
Yes, we are
Forum.
beginning a second decade.
Yeah, you know what? I want to give you a round of applause for being here year over year. So audience, let's give Peter a round of applause.
Thank you.
And then
it's always worth the time.
What's that?
It's always worth the time. The intersection of the three different communities of innovators and investors and practitioners has always made this an event that I'm surprised has not been more imitated.
Well, we have a special event. We've been working pretty hard for the past 6 months on this one. You and I, we've been in tech for a while, suffice it to say, and there have been a lot of trends over the years. Does this feel different to you than any other trend that we've seen here?
In many ways it does, because people have written, laws like, Moore's law for semiconductor density and Metcalfe's law for value of networks. Among the most important things to appreciate now is how many things that used to be predictable trend curves or strongly coupled phenomena are being unpacked. For example, your talent pool used to be readily identifiable. It was your college sophomores and seniors who would be your new hires next year. But the fastest growing cohort of new entrants to the labor force today is women over 50. That's not a pool from which we have a lot of experience in identification, recruiting, and early career stage development. The idea that someone's in an early career stage when they're in their 40s or 50s is somewhat novel. The idea that we will have people continuing to work well into their 70s and 80s is a striking development. And the idea that a 40-year-old new hire may be working for a 20-year-old manager who's a veteran of 3 startups is odd. This is no longer the premise of a romantic comedy movie, like The Intern. This is the way the workplace will be, and empowering that workplace with technology platforms and with appropriate intelligence, which is the term I prefer to AI. Artificial is never a compliment. Sure. Appropriate is always a useful thing. So appropriate intelligence. This is different. To give the short answer to your question, yeah, it's different this time.
Yeah. So in this particular example, I mean, up until the last within the last hour, we saw several different HR-related technologies. I don't know
Yes,
if you had a chance to see some of
I was
the
watching. Yeah.
presentations. So I
Yep.
think that could go hand in hand with, this shift in the type of persona that we're getting into the
Yes.
workforce. How is AI in general, just shifting away from talent for a second,
Yeah.
in general, what are your thoughts on the changes that you're seeing with AI? I mean, you and I have talked about it. Let's call it machine intelligence. How about that? So
That's fine.
yeah, okay.
If
Machine
you look
intel.
at the so-called AI winters, the
Just gonna
first
ask.
was where the ambitions of the methods just outstripped the capacity of the hardware. We just didn't have the global connectivity or the processing power, or as someone mentioned earlier, the HD camera in everyone's hand. It just wasn't there. And so they made for some great lab demos, but they did not scale. And then there was the second generation where the hardware could do it, but we were building these things like expert systems where you had to code and maintain a rule base. And we wound up with bottlenecks of people who couldn't really describe what they did. So how could you possibly encode the rule? And the limited supply of people who are capable of interviewing a human being, eliciting an understanding of what they do, and then turning that into a knowledge base. So that was your second AI winter. And these are terms that are actually in the literature, the first and second AI winters. What changed is that we had massive investment in global connection. We can gather data now, and then we can feed it to systems that don't need to be hand fed by a human trainer, but that can usefully learn and improve themselves under supervision, with psychologists as opposed to programmers, monitoring their behavior. But now it is possible to scale, and now it is possible to distribute the recommendations of these systems at scale.
And like you said too, you don't need to be a developer. You need to
Right.
just be a human to be able and have some sort of knowledge base to go off of to be able to interact with these new systems, these machine
Well, so
systems.
many of the leading science fiction writers have commented that their lack of deep understanding of the technology actually freed them to imagine what people would want and what they would do with it when they got it, as opposed to being limited by the certainty of what they thought could not be done. You talk to the William Gibsons and the Werner Vinges, and they'll say, oh yeah, not understanding the tech was actually a benefit because the people who understood it thought they knew what it couldn't do. Or they thought they knew how it would be used because they were familiar with high priests of technology behind the glass walls of the data center tending the mainframe. And they thought that the temple of tech was the model, and making that bigger and faster was the future. And it turns out that's not what the future was. The future was dispersing the temple rather than making it larger.
So yeah, for those of us who have been in IT for most of our careers, it used to be perceived as magic. I mean, Peter, what you just said resonates with me pretty
Yeah.
well. I mean, you go into a line of business operator as IT, they think you're pretty much a wizard to be able to.
They
keep
used
their
to use
system.
that term.
And they did indeed. And for those of you who are D&D nerds, some of us are wizards.
Well, look
anyway.
at the pitch we just heard from Rigo, where they actually use the phrase, and here's where the magic happens. And what it reminds me of always is Arthur Clarke's famous statement that any sufficiently advanced technology becomes indistinguishable from magic. But Barry Gamm said, well, a logical manipulation of that statement is any technology that is distinguishable from magic is insufficiently advanced. And what I think people have learned they can expect is indistinguishable from magic experiences being brought to them free and with continuous improvement. And that's not the way we used to talk about this stuff 10 years ago.
So this means that machine intelligence is accessible to all of us. And this is the part where we can say it's incumbent upon every person, every human, to be able to understand what this power wields. You and I were having a sort of a tongue-in-cheek conversation. Is this Matrix, Terminator, or is it something more like Ridley from the movie Aliens, where she's putting on an exoskeleton? And how would you describe where we're at today?
The metaphor of that final combat scene with Ridley in the second Aliens movie, where she straps on that exoskeleton and is able to take on a very fearsome threat, but only because she had previous experience as a loading dock worker in how to use that tool. And training people to use the tool is not an abdication. It is an empowerment. We are teaching elementary school children to use calculators. That didn't mean they didn't learn math. It meant they were able to begin explorations of math at a more advanced level much earlier. And in the same way, we will teach them not to replace learning to write with a GPT type tool, but rather learning to compose a prompt and fine tune it to get a good result. It's like teaching someone to use a chainsaw to do sculptures with ice. It's a capability you wouldn't have had, not a loss of a former skill.
Well, speaking of education in general, we're fortunate enough later on today to have a Wharton professor with us who is very much focused on using AI, or let's say machine intelligence, in his classroom. We'll see Ethan Mollick later on in the AI good versus evil session. But let's go ahead and give a run of show for everybody here today. I mean, we've got wonderful panels today. We've got executives with their points of view on ways that they're going to use artificial or machine intelligence. I have to correct myself repeatedly on that. In their organizations in a variety of ways. We have healthcare executives and practitioners talking about the way that AI is going to revolutionize healthcare. We have ethical and legal conversations. What else are we going to get out of today, Peter?
Mike, I think the most seductive phrase in the language right now is back to normal. So many people are hoping that the pandemic no longer defining their lives means they can go back to familiar behaviors. And I think that's a dangerous, seductive mistake that can readily be made. The customers don't want to go back. They've learned the kind of convenience and 24/7 personalized experience that they can now have. They don't want to give that back merely because the pandemic no longer imposes it on them. They want to keep that. And the phrase back to normal has another word in it, which is normal. We're not going to be in a situation that's normal. There's going to be levels of volatility. There's going to be levels of geopolitical turmoil that we are unaccustomed to having in the last several decades. In fact, Mike, this is the first forum we've ever done in which the federal funds target rate was over 2.5%. And it's double that now, which means that the environment for capital being available to fund startup companies and the hurdle rate that needs to be achieved by an enterprise IT leader wanting to justify a new investment. This is an environment that we have literally never contemplated in the context of a forum conference before.
What does that mean for startups? I mean, we just saw 9 startups today. There are more.
It means that they're going to have to talk ROI. They're going to have to talk, needle moving improvements in cost. And did you notice how many of them were talking about invisible costs that maybe people have learned to tolerate? There's a biological fact that the eye of the frog doesn't tell the brain of the frog about things that aren't moving because those things can't be food. And in the same way, things that aren't moving, we become numb to the pain. But looking at numbers of employee disengagement and burnout, looking at numbers of impact of lack of wellness and challenges that result, and application of technology and focused practice to those pain points. You have to get people mad all over again at things they thought they'd learned to tolerate. And that's really one of the challenges of being a technology leader today. It was fun to bring people novelties. Now we're doing something that's not fun. Now we're forcing people to confront pains and costs and frictions and gravities in their systems and say, you don't have to put up with this anymore. We've got stuff that's indistinguishable from magic that will help you fix that. But it's not the old IT made better, faster, cheaper. It's not reports. It's not doing your P&Ls faster. It's doing things you never tried to do before because you really couldn't do these things before. And now you can.
Because you've got this superpower, or at least this exoskeleton that helps you become a 10x in whatever it is your discipline.
You've got an extraordinarily fast, able intern who doesn't understand a thing about the business, but can notice patterns that you might not see and can make suggestions that you're too experienced to make because those things don't work, quote unquote. But an ML will say, well, I just ran 50 million scenarios here, and it looks as if this has at least a 78% chance of positive return. Are you sure you don't want to try that? That's the kind of interaction we will, in fact, have. We are already having. One of the examples I use is that in America's Cup yacht racing now, a simulator that was built for sailors to test new tactics with these amazing new, flying hulls with the hydrofoils that lift them out of the water. Well, they ran a couple of thousand copies of that simulator against each other, and new competitive strategies emerged. This is absolutely one of my favorite stories about what machine intelligence actually can do. Show us things that we wouldn't go trying to find because we, quote, know, unquote, they don't exist. The machine is too dumb to know they don't exist, so it goes and finds them anyway.
Well, that's an awesome anecdote. I think there are some other things that I want to kind of direct the audience to now, though. Let's shift gears a little bit.
Please.
So something happened in 2017 that was a departure from machine learning up until that point. I mean, you could argue you had artificial narrow intelligence really focused on good models against chess play and Go play and all of those things, but nothing really generalized. There was a paper that came out from Google Attention is All You Need, which maybe many of you have heard about already, but it seemed to me that that was a pivotal moment. That's where generative AI really was born. Would you agree with that statement? And if so, like, what does that actually mean for everybody?
If you look at what they thought was going to be hard to do in 1955 when the famous Dartmouth memo was written, they thought deduction and logic and inference and pattern recognition were going to be the hard things because relatively few people do them well. But if you look at things like what was written by Marvin Minsky in the early 1980s about how quickly we'd have artificial general intelligence, and then within 15 years he's saying, oh wait, this is the hardest thing we've ever tried to do, because capturing common sense knowledge turned out to be extraordinarily difficult to do. And what we saw with the Google paper, which I can't tell you how many people have mentioned that paper to me in their own observation as being a pivotal moment. You're certainly not alone on that. The idea that these things can now capture and synthesize Gestalt and Zeitgeist and tell us what the world seems to believe about these things is both their most extraordinary accomplishment and their most dangerous pathway for distraction and error, because they're very good at becoming more believable, but they don't have a fitness function that makes them more correct.
So we have this exoskeleton, in other words, this teenager, not even a teenager, I would say a toddler almost, who is very believable, very good at giving advice, but very poor at being accurate more than 4 out of 5 times.
Well, if you had 10 people give you an answer to a question, the 2 that seemed to be most articulate, perfectly spelled, punctuated, and phrased conveyed a certain level of credibility, and that's no longer a coupling. The most well-stated answer may be, in fact, a delusion, a hallucination of the generative AI. They will give you a description of an academic paper that doesn't exist. And it will be a frighteningly plausible description. They'll use the names of authors who are famous in the field. And you're going to have to go do fact checking. It's what I've always taught my own kids. Read Wikipedia pages from the bottom up, because the bottom is where you'll find the sources. And if you don't trust the sources, then everything else there is suspect. We need to make these tools more explainable and explaining of themselves. We need to build the fact checking mechanisms at least as quickly as we build the hallucination mechanisms.
Interesting. I'm going to poll the audience for a second. So by show of hands, we have, looks like a couple hundred in the audience right here. I'm a bad judge of that sort of thing. I need an AI to kind of do some sort of visual check here. But by show of hands, how many of you are thinking about incorporating AI into your processes today? Show of hands. Okay, that's, I would say, 80-ish% of the audience.
Yeah. And the other 20% wouldn't raise their hand if you asked if they had a pulse. So yeah.
How many remember Dean's name? Anyway, and for the rest of the audience, how many are actually using AI in your processes today? Okay, so quite a bit less, maybe half of those. So I would say 40% of the room is probably using AI in some way. Peter, this audience has come from all over the Delaware Valley and some from beyond that. They want to get something out of today. What do we need to leave them with when they exit this facility at 4, 5 o'clock today?
I always feel as if the most valuable thing you can do is not to address the people in the room, but through them to address the people they're going to have to convince when they get back to the office. You have to equip them not just to believe in a future, but also to be able to be effective change agents for that future. So we need to not merely convey possibility, but document it and support it, and give them the weapons they'll need to become effective advocates for change when they get back to the office, and not just encounter the friction and inertia that keep things from happening. And so every time you hear something today, I hope you'll hear it through a filter that says, okay, what's the argument I could make that would persuade my leadership team at home, or my team and coworkers, if I am the leader, to take action on this, and to realize how many things you can do today without permission. The old phrase, it's easier to get forgiveness than permission. The low cost of entry to a cloud service, the number of things that you can experiment with at zero cost until you want to start doing them for a revenue basis, and then you start to have to pay for them, but you don't pay for them until you're getting something done with them. That's a trend that we've been on for this entire time that we've been at Forum. For the whole 17 years that I've been at Salesforce, it's been about the fact that now trying it costs nothing. You don't start paying till you're getting value from it. That's not the way tech used to work.
Nope.
You used to have to lay down your bet and hope that 2 years later you'd be generating some ROI. Well, now you can generate the return before you make the investment, prove that it's there, then scale it and pay for it side by side. That's so important that people leave this day feeling empowered to demonstrate the possibility and to sell it to their organizations. Right now, a lot of people are in a hole. They're saying, we're threatened by recession. We're threatened by this. We're not spending on tech. We're waiting it out. If you're in a hole, don't buy lawn furniture to get comfortable at the bottom of the hole. Buy a ladder and get out of it. Buy a rocket belt and be above the field while everyone else is still in their holes. And this is how you lead the next good time instead of merely surviving a bad time.
That's a pretty optimistic view, I would say, and a very realistic one as well. Is there a downside to this tech?
There's a downside to every tool.
There you
go. They can all be used poorly. In fact, at the end of the day, you'll be hearing from Esther Dyson, who joins me for a conversation, in which she says she's not afraid of AI. She's afraid of what people might do badly with it.
Yeah, I think that's going to be a pervasive theme throughout the course of the day. Many of the panelists that are going to be talking, especially, a couple that you're going to be talking to today, and a panel that I'm going to be talking to, we're going to get into sort of the good and the bad of a lot of different ways that humans can use.
For an audience like this, Mike, all I want to do is look each of them individually in the eye and say, the future is what you do tomorrow. The future is not something that will happen that you have to predict. The future is what you do. What the people in this room do has a disproportionate effect on what that future will be, because the people who are here, merely by the fact that they are here, have chosen to be among the change agents.
You're all change agents. So thank you, I appreciate that. And this is good too, because as change agents, you're already more informed. We hope that at the end of this day today that you come away with a few nuggets that you might not have had before, and learn something new about artificial intelligence from folks that we're going to be talking to. There's one person here that I think, if you don't know who he is, Stephen Wolfram. You're going to be interviewing Stephen today.
I will.
Looking forward to that. Have some questions. Who is Stephen Wolfram, by the way?
Well, gosh, he at the time that he received his MacArthur Genius Award, he was the youngest person ever to get one. He earned his PhD before he was 20 from Caltech, and his software, Mathematica, when it came out, was the best justification you could find for buying a Next computer. It was one of the only things that made that machine truly extraordinary, and it did things that used to require very expensive, very rare people. So he's been on the front lines of, bringing forth software that did stuff that used to require an expensive, highly trained, and very scarce human being to do. He's been in that business for well over a decade. So I'm really looking forward to his perceptions of what is or is not different this time.
So this is the type of expertise we have today and who you'll get to take advantage of by listening in on the sessions. We have people who have built systems, people who are geniuses, bona fide. We have people who are executives with lots of vision about the future. We have people from all walks of life. And the thing that makes intelligence real is people. And we built this system that might be alien technology to us in the future. It's incumbent upon us as change agents, just like you said, Peter, for us all to walk away with something today. In the 9 seconds that we have left, is there anything else you'd like to say to the audience?
If anyone uses the phrase back to normal in your presence anytime in the next year, look them in the eye and say, no one wants to go back, and where we're going isn't normal.
Outstanding way to close. Peter Coffey, everybody. I'm Mike Bachman. Enjoy the day today.